Okay, welcome everyone to the Microstructure Exchange. Good to see you all. Today we have a very timely paper. In Europe, we currently have a relatively intense debate about if we should adopt a consolidated tape, similar to what has been there in the US for a long time. And the paper today is about the benefits or the potential benefits of such a consolidated feed. So let's welcome Shihao Yu from VU Amsterdam. Shihao, the screen is yours. And while Shihao is getting set up, let me tell you about the format. Shihao is happy to take your questions at any time. So you can use the raise hand function or just speak up during the presentation if you have a question. You can also use the chat to type questions, and then I will forward them to Shihao. And as a third alternative, Shihao will have a couple of question breaks during the 45-minute presentation. So you can wait until then if you like. And when we're done with the 45 minutes, then we'll have an open Q&A in voice as usual. And Shihao will stay in the room as long as there are questions left. With that, I leave it over to you, Shihao.
All right, thanks, Bill. Just want to make sure, can everybody actually hear me and also see my slides?
Yes, very good.
Cool. All right, so thanks for the organizers for including the paper in the program. And also thanks for everyone about being here. So before I start, I would like to say it's actually the very first time I present the paper. So any comments, suggestions would be actually of great help. So the paper is actually about the consolidated tape, and especially the tape in the US market. As the title goes, I'm actually wondering what's actually the role that the consolidated tape actually plays now in the current US equity market. So just a bit of motivation. So we know that the current US equity market structure has actually, I would say actually two main features. So first, I think the market is very fast. So Albert actually in his 2018 paper using the trades from NASDAQ showed that actually 20% of them arrive in less than 1 millisecond clusters. And also I think the second biggest feature is actually the market is super fragmented. So now the US has 16 markets. And if you actually look back 2 years ago that there were only 13, but now we have actually 3 more. So there are now in total 16 lit markets. And besides the lit market or public exchanges, we also have actually dozens of dark pools, broker-dealer internalizers, which actually have a more increasing role, especially after the retail trade explode. So given such a very complicated structure, the data is of course very important. So for market makers, they need to actually get the quickest data to reprice their quotes to avoid being selected. You have arbitragers who need actually quick data feeds to exploit very short-lived information. And also you have actually the buy-side algos who need actually fast data feeds to scout the markets in a fragmented structure to find the best prices to reduce their transaction costs. So what actually the market data structure in the US? So actually we have 2 main types of market data now. So first we have the SIP feeds or consolidated feeds. And we also have actually the direct feeds from the exchanges. And the key difference between these two feeds is first about the speed. So we know that SIP feeds are actually very slow. So it comes from 2 different sources of latency. So first, because SIPs aggregates trades and quotes from all exchanges. So it needs time to actually do the aggregation. And also there's a second component called geographic latency. And we'll actually talk more about it in detail later. But for exchange, there's actually no such latencies. So it's actually faster than the SIP feeds. And the difference is also actually in terms of the content. So for the SIP feeds, now we only have actually top of the book. So you have trades, you have the quote updates on the best bid and ask, but not actually depth. But for direct feeds, it is everything. So given the actually 2 types of the market data, lots of people are actually arguing that now we have sort of actually two-tiered markets. So we have actually the haves, those direct feed subscribers, and have-nots, the Snow SIP subscribers. It's actually a fair market structure, which has sort of actually given rise to a lot of policy debates, both as beyond in Europe and also in the US. So in the US, they already have actually a SIP feed. And actually they're trying to actually move from national market system 1.0 to 2.0. And actually a key improvement or change is trying to actually enhance the SIP. So for example, they're trying to add more depth, not actually full depth, but perhaps actually 5 best bid and asks, and also add all lots, add auction info, and also maybe have actually more than one SIPs to actually compete. And in Europe, we don't even have a tape, as Beyond said. But I think now having a European-wide tape is actually high on agenda of the MiFID II and MiFIA. And I think ESMA is actually working really hard to try to actually roll it out in the foreseeable future. So I would like to actually kind of summarize the paper, maybe in just actually one slide. So I mean, the question is actually about, does the consolidated tape really matter? Because I mean, the common kind of understanding is actually SIP feed is actually very slow. It's very slow, so it's actually slow. So sort of actually the fast traders actually don't use them. It's mainly actually used by so-called display users. For example, if you actually click your broker app, you see the price of a ticker, that's may actually find a SIP. But some anecdotal evidence actually might show that actually SIPs has maybe other use cases. For example, if you actually look at the regulatory filings by the dark pools, actually 45 of them actually do not actually use direct feeds. They use actually only a consolidated feed. And also, as the SIP becomes actually faster, it is actually believed to be actually used more by algo traders. And also, for example, I think the report by CFTC and SEC on the flash crash in 2010 actually showed that although a lot of HFTs do not actually use SIP as their main data input, but they still actually use SIP as sort of a data integrity check. And also a paper by Outages, we also actually look at the flash crash, and she finds that actually when the data from SIP become actually corrupted, the HFTs or the fast traders actually withdraw from the market. At least actually is maybe considered as one of the potential factors affecting their liquidity position. And a recent paper by Ernst, Sokopin, and Spatz, and I think Thomas also presented here like a month ago. They actually look at off-exchange trades in the tape, and they found even if those trades, when they actually reported to the SIP, suffer action latency, but still actually people react to that. So certainly there are actually something that actually people might actually use from the SIP data. And I mean, the question is very big, right? I ask actually, does the consolidated tape matter? But how am I actually gonna approach that? So I'm gonna actually look at 2 different types of exogenous events. So the first is sort of actually good to the tape. So back in October 2016, the LASDAQ SIP has actually gone through a major speed upgrade. And I'm actually talking more about the details of that. And the other actually type of events I look at is actually the SIP outages. So the first is about SIP actually getting faster. And the second type of events is actually when SIP is kind of out. There's actually no SIP at all in the market. So as you can actually see from those events that no matter for whether the speed upgrade or for the outages, only actually one SIP is actually affected. So we have actually 2 SIPs now in the US market, the SIP run by LASDAQ and also the SIP by the LYCE. So that actually creates a very natural standard defensive approach that I can actually use the exogenous events to tell what's actually the impact of these 2 events on the market quality and also other variables. So here's actually very kind of quick preview of the results. So first on the SIP upgrades. So what I actually find is that there's actually no significant impact of an upgrade on the overall market liquidity or actually the liquidity on LASDAQ. I will actually talk more about why I actually also want to actually look at liquidity specifically on LASDAQ. But although there's actually no impact on liquidity, I found out actually that low latency trading activity increases significantly after the SIP upgrade. So it seems that actually And I actually try to explain it through the channel that actually the advantage of fast traders through direct feeds vanishes actually, or at least to some extent after the SIP upgrade. So they have to really kind of become faster than before, competing with actually the slow traders who actually now become a bit faster because the data upgrade. So there seems actually the upgrade on SIP is creating some sort of externality in the market. There's no actual real benefit on liquidity, but activity kind of actually increases. And the second set of results on the SIP outages is that I see actually when the SIP is unavailable in the market, the liquidity actually drops significantly. So that's actually pretty much the paper in a nutshell. Yeah, as Bjorn said, if there's any questions, please just interrupt me and ask. All right, so if there's no questions, let me actually proceed with sort of actually an overview of the literature that the paper relates to. So I think the first trend in literature the paper relates to is actually about the effect of market data on the trading and market quality. So the three papers, I mean, the first two papers I list here actually look at the introduction of the direct feed, sorry, the fee on the direct feeds by the exchange, and also the introduction of the direct feed by the exchanges. For example, the Brogard and Brugge, they actually look at that when the exchange actually start to charge the fee on their direct feeds, then the market volume of the exchange actually drops because there's actually less, the exchange will have actually less time on the BBO, and also the ISO volumes, the intermarket sweep orders volumes actually drops. And the second paper by Hendershot, Reisman, and Schwab, they also actually look at the direct feed, but they look at the introduction of the LYCE integrated feeds, and they show that after the feed introduction, the share actually on LYCE actually increases. And perhaps actually a relevant paper is actually by Ye, Yang, and Guy. So they actually look at very sort of actually older last speed upgrade in 2011. And they also actually found that liquidity doesn't actually change, but they don't actually really look at how the speed upgrade affects the trading behavior and also the latency activities. So I think the contribution of the difference on my paper is actually kind of focused on the SIP feed, not really actually on the direct feed. And also there's actually a strand of literature comparing the two types of feeds, the consolidated feeds and the direct feeds. For example, O'Hara, Yao, and Ye look at actually the all-out trades, which are actually missing in the SIP before 2016, sorry, with 2013. And the paper by Battaglio, Covey, and Jennings, they look at actually the inclusion of all-out quotes. So now in SIP, now SIP that we have actually all-out trades included after 2013, but all-out quotes is still actually missing. So actually look at the all-out quotes and find out actually the exclusion of all-out quotes actually result in worse executions, especially for high-price stocks. And the first to actually look at sort of actually the content difference between the two types. And then the following a few papers really compete, so really actually look at the speed difference between these two types. The paper by Ding, Hanna, and Hendershot find out actually dislocations of SIP MBBOs can actually sometimes diverge from the direct MBBOs. That means the MBBOs constructed from the direct feeds. But the duration is actually quite short. So it might be actually another big issue for low frequent traders. And also, I mean, the famous paper by Bartlett and McCrary, actually they look at the so-called direct feed arbitrage. That means if HFTs can actually use direct feeds to do the latency arbitrage, and they found actually the profits from it is actually not so big. And also a paper by Hansbroek looking at the information share of a direct feeds. And he found out that at a very high frequency, of course, information share of direct feeds actually totally dominates the SIP feed. So the above papers actually sort of actually look at these sort of actually static comparisons between the two SIPs, between the two data feeds. And my paper really actually look at sort of actually exogenous real life events instead of actually comparing these two data feeds. And these are actually sort of actually the literature on the direct feeds and also SIP feeds. And I think a third literature that this paper is really actually touches on is sort of actually the impact of trading speed on market quality. So in the theory part, I think we know actually from the past work that whether the speed, so the impact of the speed upgrades on the market quality really depends on who actually gets faster, right? So if it's actually high frequency market makers who become faster, then the market liquidity actually increases. Sorry, I think there's a typo here. And if the high frequency arbitrageurs actually become faster, then liquidity actually drops. And the empirical paper by Broker et al. And also by Shihao and Consolidated actually confirmed that. So here I actually look at a unique event where the slow traders, especially those buy-side algos who actually use SIP fits, become faster. And it's actually very clear to what extent that actually might affect the market quality. So just to make sure that everybody is on the same page, let me actually try to introduce some institutional details about the SIP in the US market. So on the right, the graph actually depicts the geographic locations of different exchanges and the two SIPs. So this is actually somewhere in New Jersey in the US. So you have actually the LASDAQ venues and also the LASDAQ SIP here located in Carteret. And you have actually the LYCE venues and LYCE SIP up there in the Mahwah, New Jersey. And you have actually the CBOE venues like the BATS and the Direct Edge here in the Secaucus, and also most dark pools and IEX. So, and also the figure actually shows you sort of the travel latency between those data centers, and also the latency at the SIP. As I said before, the SIP has to actually aggregate the data, so it takes time for the SIP to process all the quotes and trades from the different exchanges. So you can see actually the SIP processing latency is actually kind of a big component, and is compared to actually the traveling latencies. So that's actually about geographic allocation about those exchanges and SIPs. So as I said, like there are two SIPs, right? So we have actually a SIP run by LYCE and a SIP run by LASDAQ. And the very important thing to know that is actually all the LYCE listed stocks actually report their trades and quotes to LYCE SIP. And all the LASDAQ listed stocks reports to LASDAQ SIP. So where you report your trades depends only on your listing exchange, not really actually where you trade. That actually creates the issue that we have a so-called geographic latency. So here's actually a simple example. Let's say if you're actually a SIP subscriber here at Mahwah, and you want to actually trade a stock in NASDAQ. And if you actually want to get a quote update from LYCE, remember that LASDAQ stocks can also be traded on LYCE, right? So what happens is that actually a quote update from LYCE in LASDAQ stock will first have to travel all the way from Mahwah here to Carteret, get processed by the LASDAQ SIP, and then travel back to the subscriber to the SIP. So essentially you have like 2 times 280 microseconds plus the processing latency at the LASDAQ SIP. So it has to actually take like almost 1 millisecond to actually get a quote update from LYCE trading in the NASDAQ stocks. So I spent time on the geographic latencies because I want to actually show how the speed upgrade in the LASDAQ SIP affects the trading. So here's actually some kind of data on the speed upgrade. So here I actually plot the processing latency of a LASDAQ SIP and also the LYCE SIP in the past decade. So essentially, you see actually there are actually several speed upgrades over the years, but the biggest one actually happens somewhere in the October 2016, where the LASDAQ SIP actually has a major speed upgrade. So the median latency, or precisely the processing latency at the LASDAQ SIP, drops from like 350 to less than 20. So it's actually a major speed upgrade. But if you actually look at LYCE, the latency around that time actually stayed almost good. So what does that actually mean? So what's actually the implication of the upgrade on the so-called geographic latency in the graph I showed you before? So I think the implication one is super simple, right? Because now remember that actually only last tag stocks, that means last tag, that a stock listed on last tag exchange have to report to the last tag SIP. So if the last tag SIP actually gets a speed upgrade, that means the last tag stocks have now actually a faster SIP feed, but not the case for the LYCE stocks. So no matter where you are, no matter whether you will incur geographic latency or not, anyway, so the last tag stocks now have actually a faster SIP feed. And the second implication is actually more nuanced, and I'm trying to actually explain it actually in more detail. Because I'm trying to argue that actually the SIP upgrade to the last tag SIP has actually has actually a bigger impact for the last tag venues compared to other exchanges, especially for trading the last tag stocks. So let's say that Beyond is actually a fast trader who subscribes to direct feed, and I'm actually a slow trader who subscribes to SIP. And we're actually now both located somewhere here because we know HFT co-locates their trading algos to the exchange servers. So we're both here in Carteret. And for the direct feeds, Beyond just get actually from last tag. So let's say it's actually kind of below the 20 microseconds. And for me, I'm also here to subscribe to the SIP. Before the upgrade, I have to actually wait the processing from the last tag SIP, which takes 350 before, but now it's only 20. So you can see that the speed difference between these two data feeds for the last tag stocks on the last tag exchanges vanishes, it drops actually significantly. So that means the advantage from the direct feeds is actually vanishes actually also a lot. But it's actually not the case, or it's actually less so, if you're thinking HFT co-located at the Amawa here to the LYCE exchanges. For example, again, Beyond and me. So Beyond listens to the direct feeds. So there's actually no geographic latency, right? Whenever there's actually a quote update on LYCE, then he will actually get it right away. But for me, I still actually suffer the geographic latency because the reduction in the speed of a SIP is only about the processing. There's nothing changed about the geography. So for me, I still have to actually wait the message, travel from Amawa to Carteret and then back. The only difference is actually the processing latency now is actually greatly reduced. I used to have to wait 350, but now it's actually less than 20. So you can see actually the impact of the speed upgrade on the last tag SIP has actually differential impact on the different exchanges, right? So if you actually trade NASDAQ stocks on NASDAQ exchanges, I think the impact will actually be the biggest. So,
Shihao,
yeah.
Thanks for making me the fast guy. I'm sure it's not the case in real life. Andre has a question.
Yeah.
Thanks, Bjorn. Hi, Shihao. A quick clarification question. So this example of 20 microseconds for NASDAQ, is that the real numbers that they're operating with, or is that just for the sake of the example? I guess my broader question is, does the upgrade completely eliminate the advantage of direct feeds, or is there still an advantage there?
I'm pretty sure there's still an advantage because, I mean, there are actually many different components of trading, right? You have actually latency in data feeds, and also the connection to the exchange might also be a factor. So you might actually use faster connection, and also, of course, your in-house algos also has latency. So I'm pretty sure that after the upgrade, if you're actually HFT or low latency trader, you still have actually speed advantage. But my point is trying to see that after the upgrade, the advantage should actually vanishes to some extent, not completely.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Marcus.
Thanks. You've shown us information here about the first order, the first moment of the latency distribution. What about variants of this thing? So for example, there's jitter and other, and I guess network congestion and things like that, which I guess you could imagine become relatively more important if the mean comes down. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yes, very good point. Yeah, indeed. Actually, the reason why they have actually speed upgrade is because they moved the system from a very old infrastructure to the for the INET, so the technology by elastic exchanges. So indeed, I think if you actually look at the website, not only actually the median actually goes down, but also actually the capacity of processing also increases. So that means actually they can handle more orders within a short period of time. So I think that's maybe actually also important, especially when the volatility is actually high, you have actually bursts of trades and quotes. But still, even if you actually look at the median, now it's still actually a huge improvement. And if you consider these, the variance, I think it's sort of actually something that adds up on it, not actually really actually make it actually worse. Yeah.
I have a question too, Shihao.
Sure.
I think you said that you will focus on this 2016 event at NASDAQ, but we could see from the plots that there were a couple of events of speed upgrades at NYSE, in the NYSE SIP as well. So is there a reason not to look at those as well?
Yeah, I think it's a very good point. The reason actually now I focus on the 2016 event is actually the speed upgrades is actually the most significant, as you can see from the graph. But I think it's actually worth checking also the other two events to see if we actually see similar results. That will actually make the results here more robust. That's actually something I definitely actually want to do. Thanks. Yes, so any more questions? All right, if there's actually no question, I will actually proceed with the empirical approach. So not actually, as you can see actually from my explanation on the geographic latency and the implications of the SIP upgrades on it, that I can actually sort of actually use a different diff to actually compare first, I think the elastic stocks with the LYCE stocks. So what I do is actually have a match sample. So I randomly selected 60 elastic stocks from the S&P 500, and I match them actually with 60 LYCE stocks on price, volume, market capitalization, and industry. So that I can actually run different diff regression. So I compare whether after the SIP upgrades, do we see actually the liquidity and also the trading in elastic stocks actually differs relative to LYCE stocks. So we care actually about the gamma coefficient here on the interaction tab. And the second sort of actually triple diff and diff is, as I explained, I expect that the speed upgrade on elastic SIP will actually be more impactful on the trading of elastic stocks on the elastic venues. So here, what we care about is whether the gamma 3 here, the coefficient in front of the triple interaction term, will be actually significant or not. I think I actually have a slide for questions, but I think we have just had a round of questions. So if there's actually no questions coming up, I would just proceed.
Go ahead.
Great. So I've talked about empirical strategies by the diff, and now I actually have a table of all the variables I computed and also the data source I use for the empirical study. So I look at actually a wide range of different liquidity and trading metrics. So those are actually very standard liquidity measures. So we actually not spend time on them. And here is actually the price improvement, because one argument for the slow SIP is actually that for wholesalers like Citadel, when they actually claim that they actually price improve on the retail trades, you never know actually what price they actually use as a benchmark. They might claim that have actually price improvement on your trade, but they might actually use a stale quote from the SIP. So on the surface, you got a price improvement, but actually not. So after the speed upgrade of the SIP, if there's a really kind of pressure from that, I might actually see that there's actually an increase in the price improvement, or I should call them true price improvement benchmark to actually the to sort of the true MBBO instead of actually the MBBO on the old stale SIP. And for the trading metrics, I look at the ISO share, that is actually the volume by the ISO orders, because the literature has shown that the ISO orders actually used by informed traders to actually sweep the available quantities at multiple exchanges. And also look at all-out share, and also more importantly, I look at actually 3 measures that can actually be a proxy for the low latency trading. So the first 2 is actually the cancel to trade ratio, and also the order volume. That means the quantity of all the submitted limit orders divided by the trade volume. And these 2 are actually from the SEC Midas to actually publish the data set on their website, I think on a quarterly basis, but the metrics are actually daily. And the problem with these 2 measures is actually they're sort of actually measuring the overall quoting activity. So it can come from HFT, but it can also actually come from the other algo traders. So I think the best available measure we can compute from the public data to measure the HFT activity is actually the strategic runs by Hansbrook and Saar. So this is actually what I do. So I compute the strategic runs, and also I scale them actually by the volume, as suggested actually by another paper by Mao Ye. To compute the strategic runs, you need to actually have the data from the order book. So I got actually data from Lobster so that I can have actually the order book events for the stocks, based on which I can actually compute the strategic run measures. And of course, as a second type of exogenous events, we're actually looking at SIP outages. There's actually no data from tech or from the consolidated tape that we can use, right? Because by definition, during those times, the tech is actually out. So there's actually no data from them. So to actually look at what happens in the market during the SIP outages, I actually got data from Main Street. So I got actually direct feeds from the complaint. So I can actually look at the liquidity and also other trading variables during the outages. So before we actually move to the regression results on those liquidity and the trading metrics, here just actually a very quick check to see to what extent do the prices on the new SIP become actually better. So here I compare the 2 MBBOs. One is actually based on the SIP time step, and the other is actually by participant time step. So now if I actually have the tech data, there's actually 2 time steps to each message. So one time step is actually called SIP time step. That's actually where the trade is disseminated by the SIP. And the other time step is called the participant time step. That's where the exchange really actually register the trade in their matching engine or on the way out. So by computing the MBBO based on SIP and MBBO based on these hypothetical participant time step, you can actually to see whether they actually the MBBOs by SIP have actually dislocations from sort of actually the true MBBO. So as you can see, both the duration of the dislocations and the number of dislocations actually drop significantly after the upgrade. And it's even more so for stocks, for Nasdaq stocks on the Nasdaq exchange. So it's just actually kind of a pre-evidence showing that actually the speed upgrade really actually impacts. And now it's actually a set of regression results. As I said, we care about the coefficient of interaction term, which actually measures the impact on LYCE stocks versus the, on Nasdaq stocks versus the LYCE stocks. If the speed upgrades of SIP really actually matters, we should see actually the variables actually change in the Nasdaq stocks relative to the LYCE stocks. So for all the liquidity measures I computed, there's actually no significant impact. But actually, if you actually turn to the trading measures, especially actually the low latency measures, they're actually all significant. And also, so here the coefficient and numbers here are actually in absolute terms. To just get a sense of the magnitude of the change, I divide them actually by the unconditional mean in the sample. And you can see actually the cancel to trade ratio increases quite a lot by 16%. And the magnitude is also actually very large for the other two measures. And then actually run the triple diff by comparing whether the difference between these two, between the LYCE stocks and the Nasdaq stocks has actually a differential impact on the Nasdaq exchange versus other exchanges. So we care about the coefficient on the triple interaction term. And again, on the liquidity measures, there's actually no change.
Are your liquidity measures in basis points?
Yeah.
So drop by 1 basis point sounds big in economic terms. For this S&P 500 stocks, they're quite liquid, but it's not economically, I mean, not statistically significant.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, I mean, if you think about economic terms, it's actually quite big, as you said. But just based on the regression results, it's not significant. So, I'm not confident to say if there's actually kind of true impact or not. And if actually move to the trading measures, the coefficient of triple interaction term is actually again significant for the two low latency measures. Unfortunately, I don't have actually directly data from from all exchanges. So I'm only actually able to actually look at the measures based on the cancel trade ratio and also order trade ratio. But for these two, they're actually also increase. They have actually significant coefficient. Yeah, I see a question by Pete.
Thank you. I would just want to follow up on Bjorn's point. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. Why is the power of your statistical test so low? You know, usually with market microstructure, we get very high power because we have lots of degrees of freedom and so forth. But it seems surprisingly low power to like 1 basis point should be significant, I would think.
Right. I think it's actually a good point to think about. But now I don't actually have an immediate answer on that.
Maybe you can remind us what n is here. What is the frequency of the observations?
So all here are actually the daily stock measures. So for each stock and per day, I actually compute a measure. So
the stock days, but you had did you have 120 stocks in the sample?
Right. Yeah, I think, I need to actually think more about the statistics to see actually why that the power is so low in this case.
Yeah, it's puzzling because when we do market microstructure empirical research, we often get t-statistics that are, t-statistical 50 means something matters, but a t-statistical 5 might mean it doesn't matter, or it's a very tiny effect. So
is it because they actually look at more high frequent data, like in hourly or minutes? Because now I think it's actually quite like low frequent. It's still actually daily stock measures.
Yeah, so if you're taking one snapshot, a daily stock measure could be an average across the day for the stock, minute by minute, or it could be just one snapshot at a point in time during the day. That might be why it's low power. Is that possible?
Yeah, I think that's possible. And also I think for here, the triple diff and diff, I really actually compare like the exchange from the other, like compare the last exchange with the others. And there are only actually 4 alike exchanges because only actually include 4 maker-taker exchanges. just trying to actually make it comparable. So I think maybe the variation here between just 4 exchanges is maybe just too small, and that actually makes the power actually low.
But you're doing 1 snapshot a day, or are you using averaging it across minutes of the day, or what are you doing?
It's just 1 snapshot a day, so it's daily measure.
Okay, so that's probably why the power is so low, because there's a lot of noise in the snapshot. That if you average it across the day, a lot of the noise would go away.
Yeah, that could be the case.
Yeah. Anyway, okay. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, so yeah, again, I think I was actually about to say that the triple diff real shows that actually there's actually indeed an increase in the low frequency measures. And also just actually mention that I also actually do stock diff fixed effects for the triple diff, and also include the US election, which is actually my sample, and also include VIX, and the results actually do not actually change much. Right, so I have another slide for questions, but if it's actually long, I will proceed.
Yeah, go on. We have not so long until the general Q&A.
Yeah. All right, so the first set of events, as I mentioned, is actually for the speed upgrade to the SIP. And the second type of events I look at is actually when the SIP suffer from outages. So it's kind of the opposite events. So here are actually the 3 major SIP glitches actually found. And each of them actually has a relatively short duration, and they happen actually at both SIPs. So the first is actually on last stack, and the other 2 is actually on LYCE. So my goal is to see actually during those SIP outages, do we actually see a significant drop in the liquidity in the market? Remember that when those SIP data is actually unavailable, the fast traders, they still actually have access to direct feeds. So it's not actually trading halt on exchange, but just the SIP data is unavailable. So in a sense, you have sort of like super information asymmetry during those events. And there's actually nothing new in the empirical strategy, still different diff, because when there's actually outage in the last stack SIP, I just take the last stack stocks as a treatment group and match them actually with a group of LYCE stocks, because for the LYCE stocks, their SIP still actually works as normal. So the first actual regression, I just pull the 3 events, and we have like a simple interaction term after just means 30 minutes after the start of the glitch. And the treated, just as I said, if there's an outage in the LYCE SIP, then all the LYCE stocks are treated. And if there's actually an outage in the last stack SIP, then all last stack stocks are treated. And the result is actually quite significant, both actually statistically and economically. So what I've actually shown here is, again, just divide the number, which is actually in absolute terms, by the unconditional mean. As you can see here in the brackets, the relative quota spread actually increased by more than 10%, a little bit less for the effective spreads, but for volume, the drop is actually huge. It's actually over 40%. And also the depth on MBBO also drops quite a lot, about like 15%. And the above regression, actually, I pulled the 3 glitch events together around 1 regression. And there's actually something unique about the first outage. That's actually the outage on January the 3rd, 2013. So it turns out actually for last stack SIP, there are different channels, and each channel is responsible for disseminating quotes and trades for different tickers. And those are actually kind of sorted by their by the ticker symbols. So the outage on that day actually happens sequentially, first actually on the early channels and then on the late channels. So if you actually focus on the first period, when only the early channel stocks are affected, the late channel stocks actually become a perfect control group. So here's just actually zooming to the particular event to see if we actually still find the results as what we actually find in the pooled regression. So here's actually just a graph on the liquidity measures around the glitch. As you can see that, for example, the relative quarter spread for the stocks in the early channel really actually ticks up when the first glitch started, but you don't actually see much variation either in the LYCE stocks, which is actually normal, or in the last tech stocks in the late channels. So it seems actually the stock in the early channels actually get hit first and they respond to the SIP outage. And you see actually effective spread actually increases and the depth actually draws and also the volume actually drops. And I think I'm actually run out of time. Or because we take questions in between, so.
Yeah, take your time to wrap it up, Shihao.
Right, thanks. Yeah, so I mean, I've just actually show you some visual evidence. And here is just actually a regression results confirming the findings. So the first regression is actually just look at the first, what I do is to first look at the first period that is actually between the start of the first outage. So after the start of the first outage, but before the second. So I think the variable of interest here is actually interaction term here. So period 1 means actually, as I said, like the time period between the start of these two glitches, and the early channel equals to 1 when the stock is actually in the channels that are affected by the first outage. So as you can see, actually the coefficient on the first interaction term is significant for most liquidity measures. So the spread goes up and the volume drops and also the depth drops. But you don't actually see significant results in the stocks in the late channels because they're not actually affected by the first glitch. Yeah, and then actually look at the second period. That's actually when the second glitch actually start to actually take effect. So this time actually you still see that the stock in the late channels have actually higher spreads, but you don't see actually the depth actually decrease actually more for those. So I think it actually makes sense because after the first glitch, maybe the whole market is actually impacted. So there's sort of a contagion from the from the affected stocks to the others. So that's why actually, if you look at just the time dummy, you see that the depth actually drops for those unaffected stocks as well. All right, so I think that's pretty much every results I want to show. So just to conclude, so I look actually two sort of actually exogenous events affecting the affecting the SIP speed and availability. So the first, when we actually have a speed upgrades on the last SIP, and we don't actually see significant impact on the market liquidity, but we do see actually low latency activities actually goes up. So the possible explanation is actually now the direct feed subscribers like HFTs vanishes actually, their advantage over the slow traders who actually use the SIP fees actually vanishes to some extent. So they really have to actually speed up and trade and actually quote more actively. And for SIP outages, as we see, the market actually liquidity drops when the SIP is actually not available. So given the time, I will actually skip the maybe the discussions for the National Market System 2.0. Just trying to actually stress that maybe speeding up the single SIP does not help the market. And now at other proposals like competing SIPs, I'm not sure. It seems that actually, even if you actually increase the SIP or trying to reduce the geographic latencies, there might be still actually ways that actually can be faster. So maybe you create a sort of actually another round of arm race, not actually really between HFTs, but between those small traders, sorry, the slow traders, like the execution algos from the buy side and HFTs. Maybe the more content will help by including actually more information in the SIP, but never actually the speed. So it's more like if you actually look at a graph, I think given the SIP actually enhance the SIP, it's like sort of actually giving like maybe a better shoes to the investors, and or you can give him a bike if it's actually in Holland. But anyways, HFTs will just have to pedal a little bit harder, just trying to cruise at a faster speed. But what's the cost? I mean, you burn more calories, and the HFT is actually burn more gas, and it seems there's actually no help on the market. Right. Yeah, that's actually everything about it.
Thank you, Shihao. Very nice and good to see this old picture again. Albert used to use it. So we have a couple of questions lined up, and everyone please raise your hand if you have questions, and we'll take them in time priority, and Tom is first.
Okay, thanks, Shihao. So I'm thinking about if I'm a slow trader and I see the best bid is at NASDAQ, but is not really at NASDAQ because things have changed. Mm-hmm. Do you think slow traders, when they route to NASDAQ, do they send an immediate or cancel order? Or would they let NASDAQ then route their order to wherever the NBBO is?
That's such a good question. So it seems to me that if you're actually a slow trader, maybe I will just ask the NASDAQ to route the orders, right? Because for me, I'm actually slow. So
there's also big fees with that.
Yeah, that's actually most of the thinking, because I think if you use more, because I know if you actually use more complicated orders, you incur also higher fees, right? So it's sort of like a balance of increasing your own sort of actually, let's say smart order routing technology, or you actually pay kind of higher fee in exchange, as the exchange help you. So I think you have to balance the cost between these two sides, and I don't see actually a clear answer to that.
Okay, of how it would change when latency drops. Okay. That's what I mean. I also don't see how. What would be obvious? Would you see more immediate or cancel or more routing?
I would say if my story actually holds, I think if the data fee you get, for example, if you're actually a slow trader, let's say you're a buy-side algo, and you can't actually afford the direct fees from exchanges, you rely on SIP. And of course, I think if there's a latency reduction in SIP, that means that the data you actually use become more reliable. So that means actually your algo might be actually more helpful in this case with a faster SIP. So maybe you actually start to use more immediate cancel order instead of asking exchange. And also the cost is actually not by you, right? Because the SIP upgrade is for everybody. It's sort of like a public good. So you don't have to incur your private cost. So I would guess, just a very wild guess, they're actually trying to use more sort of their own order to do the trade.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense.
I see a question from Joshua. Yes, please.
Hi, Shihao. Thanks for the interesting talk. So I wanted to ask about your results about the SIP outages and how that leads to worse liquidity. I guess my question is, do you have in mind like a mechanism or an economic channel for that? If you say a few words, and then depending on the answer to that, to what extent do you think these short-term effects that we get from a short-term outage in this SIP, to what extent does that speak to the long-term effect of the presence or absence of having the SIP? Thanks.
Yeah, thanks. I think it's a very good question. So, of course, actually the SIP, I have actually the results on the glitches, but remember that I only actually find 3 major glitches in so many years. So to some extent, the SIP is still reliable. So if you just say, okay, now because SIP can have actually glitch now and then, or at very low probability, and you see the liquidity actually drops a lot when they actually suffering outages, it's not fair to say that SIP is actually really kind of, it's bad or something. So I agree that if you just actually look at the glitches, you can't really answer some sort of long-term questions. But I think my point, the first set of results based on the upgrade on the SIP speed is sort of actually more kind of answering the long-term impact, because the shift there is actually kind of structural. It actually affects the trading afterwards. So I think there, if you actually see like a low latency activity actually increases, which actually does not help the market liquidity, that's actually something that is not desirable for actually further enhancing the SIP by just actually increasing the speed. So I think the second result only actually shows that SIP still actually matters in the market. So when the SIP is out, the liquidity is actually impacted greatly. But if for 99% of the time SIP is still there, maybe it's not a very kind of really actually a biting issue to some extent.
Yes, there's a question from Carlos.
Thank you. Great presentation. Kind of a specific question. So at the latter part there, you mentioned the new Reg and MS, and that you didn't have time to go over. I was wondering if you could offer a few, what were you thinking there? At least that was my understanding.
Yeah, so yeah, I have some kind of reflections on the newly proposed MMS 2.0, especially the enhancement to SIP. So it seems to me actually SIP that, so I think my general point, at least based on my results, showed that, okay, if you actually enhance the SIP, at least only on the speed, you're not really helping the slow traders, because as this comic shows, that HFTs can actually just become faster, and they can still actually have advantage over slow traders, even though that the slow traders might actually become faster. But I think for the other proposals in the MS 2.0, for example, adding more content, for example, if you add all-out quotes and depth and auction imbalances, so you really actually sort of enhance the SIP by including more information. Maybe those information can be actually used by slow traders more effectively by just compared to just actually increasing the speed of SIP a bit. So that's why I'm thinking that, because actually one proposal by the MS 2.0 is actually having competing SIPs. So now we have actually kind of a centralized system for SIP. All LYCE stocks report to LYCE SIP, and all LASDAQ stocks report to LASDAQ SIPs. And now I think the new proposal thinks we should have more like a market solution to the SIP. So let's actually say we have multiple competing SIPs, and then you solve sort of actually the geographic latency inherent in the current centralized system. But again, I think even you have actually competing SIPs, let's say you're a slow trader, and now you can get actually SIP from just the place that is closest to you. But still, I mean, the SIP latency is just actually one component in your whole trading process, right? If you actually want to react faster, you still have to have a better, a faster code, have better connection to exchanges. So it seems to me that if we have competing SIPs, it might actually still have sort of actually externality results. So that makes HFTs to act even faster, but it can't. But the slow traders can still actually be at a disadvantage because the speed difference can come from different sources. So
if it's okay, can I push back a little bit? If it's okay. So most routing in the internet, particularly internet flow, right? You do quality of service estimates, right? And you do prioritization. And so the reason that things don't fall apart is because there is a bunch of different providers that are kind of providing the same thing, right? And so I'm not sure how expressive are outages as, you know, things get more and more complex, but what would you make of the argument that we've been dealing with internet traffic for quite some time, and it seems that the thing really works really well? I mean, you know, and yeah, there's no reason why, you know, information flow should be very different because it's the financial market. I mean,
yeah, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I get your point. But I think, of course, I think the benefit of having multiple SIPs is that have sort of actually redundancy, right? Which is actually good for catastrophic results. If one SIP is down, you still have others to back up. But I mean, not everything comes for free, right? If you have actually multiple SIPs, each SIP has to, again, do all the things that actually the current centralized SIP does. So you might actually increase the total fixed costs. And that's actually one thing. The second is actually the benefit of having just one SIP is everybody can just actually look at that SIP and then you get a sort of a centralized price. But imagine if you have actually multiple SIPs, which SIP should I look at? Because depending on where you are, I mean, your geographic location and which SIP you subscribe to, you might have actually different prices at the same time. And which actually is the price that we actually should actually really use as a consensus. I think that's actually another issue of having multiple SIPs.
I'm not going to push back. Maybe we'll just follow up online or just offline, right? But the fact that we have an artificial basis risk is just coming up, right? If you're far away and you're trading from, I don't know, Antarctica, everything's going to be harder, right? There's no, this whole business of like, it has always been artificial. It's now we're just recognizing it because we can measure it. And I don't know. Yeah, thank you.
So as you could hear it, the clock in the background, we reached the full hour. But Shihao has said that he will stay on here. So feel free to stay here and ask more questions. For those of you who have to go though, please note that we have a seminar again already next week. And then Albert Menkveld, who is here, together with Anna Dreber, will present the results of the FinCap project, which is the first crowdsourced project in economics and finance. That's going to be a bit of a special event as it is longer. The presentation will be 45 minutes as usual, but then we will have 3 invited discussants and have a longer discussion afterwards. So it will be 1 hour and 45 minutes. If there are any more questions now for Shihao, please raise your hand. Tom, you go ahead.
Thanks. So Shihao, this is the other thing, and you might have said this and I just missed it, but if I think about a SIP outage affecting, I think of it as affecting everyone. Like all the fast traders are also going to be looking for the SIP for at least, regulatory messages. Do you see it? Is that your interpretation of the results on the SIP outage that affects everyone? Or are you saying that it would really especially affect slow traders?
So I think my results sort of actually compare again, like the SIP outage affected stocks, like whenever there's actually outage at LASDAQ. And I look at whether the LASDAQ stocks are affected more compared to LYCE. And of course, actually, if you look at the final results, we're actually zooming the first event. So after some time, after the start of the outage, you really see actually a contagion, right, from the affected stocks to also to others. So I think it's actually then affects everybody. But interesting result is actually if you remember from my first regression results on the first event, then in the first period, when the first outages occurs, it really actually affects the stock in the earning channels. So I would say that if the glitch actually continues a bit, of course, it actually starts to affect everybody. As you said, like the regulatory messages also actually come from the SIP, and then the HFTs must also pay attention to those messages. But I think the good result is actually you don't see like a simultaneous effect of the SIP outage on all stocks, but you see actually the sort of first affect the really the affected stocks and then the others.
That makes sense.
Yeah, thanks.
I have a question.
Yep.
In Europe, one of the things that is being discussed now is if the consolidated feed should contain both trades and quotes. Do you have anything to say regarding that based on your results or based on your understanding of this topic, if the relative importance of the quotes and the trades?
Yes, that's a very good point. I think, yeah, now people are indeed discussing what should be included in the European intake. I think if you want to include quotes, again, we have actually the issue of the geographic latency, and that's going to be actually worse in Europe. In the US, I mean, we have actually different geographic locations for exchanges, but they're still actually at the same state, right? They're just just 15 miles maybe away from each other. But imagine you have actually European consolidated tape, and then you include all the exchanges from different European countries. The geographic latency is huge. So of course it's nice to have like pre-trained information, have the quotes in the tape, but I think people have to be really more careful about the latency created by the SIP. So it seems to me actually a viable solution would be just actually, at least I think first, try the post-trade report just for the trades. And then maybe if that actually works, and then maybe people have to think more about how to create a table also for the quotes. Because I don't see that there's actually kind of easy solution to solve the geographic latencies, the European tape, if you actually want to include the quotes.
Well, it depends on how low latency you need it to be, maybe.
Yeah.
If you take it from a buy-side investor who is keen to know what the price was in the quotes at the time of a trade, then maybe it doesn't need to be better than 100 milliseconds or accurate or something like that.
Yeah, that's true. But then thinking like, if you really actually include quotes in the tape, and then those quotes suffer from very great geographic latency, whatever the institutional traders actually want to trade, the price you get might be very stale. Maybe it come from, maybe you see actually there's the best ask there that he can buy, but still maybe the best ask is actually from a very distant country, and that quote is actually very stale. So of course, I mean, your trade, so I think like, it really actually matters whether the quotes you see whenever you actually want to trade is actually kind of the actual quotes actually there. Not really about like, even though if I only actually trade, let's say every minute or something, that the problem is actually less for me. And of course, if you trade less, maybe the latency affects you less because I mean, you don't have to be really kind of making the market, trying to actually stay in front of the queue and trying to avoid being selected. But even for buy-side traders, I think you still, I think if you have actually large geographic latency, you can actually make sure that the prices you see can still be tradable or not. Just at every instant when we actually want to buy, right?
Good. Thanks. Carlos, did you have the hand up again or no?
Yeah, it's a completely a separate thing, but it's a very small point to try to make sure I understood it. When we look at this, how much can we extrapolate of what a, I don't know, 8-hour outage would look like?
I think.
I mean, I don't know. Maybe I'm a regulator, so I always think about the worst case, right? So, what does the really bad thing looks like? What am I buying insurance for?
Yeah, actually, there's actually one event which I don't actually include in my analysis. There is a so-called flash freeze on Nasdaq happened in 2013. That's when there's also actually SIP outage, but maybe they think the SIP outage is so big that there's actually no kind of quick fix on that. So they actually shut down the trading for all the stocks in that day because the SIP is actually not available. So I would say that if the situation really prolongs to like hours, maybe I think the best solution would be just to shut the market down. And because I mean, as I said, like without actually SIP, you're creating sort of like a super information asymmetry between these slow traders and fast traders. So maybe that's something that is not desirable if you continue actually letting the trade happen.
So just make sure I understand this. We would shut down the market during business hours.
That's
the advice. No, I just want to make sure. I'm trying to get it because I'm a simple man, right? I'm a very simple man. So shut down the market during business hours. That like you would say, you know, anything Yeah. Oh,
Yeah, I think I'm not sure if this is the best solution, but at least I think that's actually what people did back in 2013.
I think Professor Kyle had an actual question. I just wanted to small point. So, yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Well, I had a philosophical question that's a little bit off topic. So if someone else has something that's more on topic, you should bring that up.
So go ahead, Pete.
So if you have a consolidated tape, you can use it the way it's used in the United States, which is that it's used to report historical events that have happened. And you could report bids and offers too, but the bids and offers are historical bids and offers posted on the actual exchanges. You can't hit the bids and offers on the consolidated tape, right? But if you have a consolidated tape, the technology of the consolidated tape itself, the fact that it allows you to send messages and the fact that the messages are received in a particular order, that allows the consolidated tape to be used as essentially a market. For example, you could have a rule that you can't post a trade. If you try to post a trade to the consolidated tape, but somebody else has already been bidding at that price first, that trade gets done, but the quantity of one side of the trade that got executed is actually going to be transferred to the person who is on the consolidated tape ahead. So essentially a consolidated tape technologically can fairly straightforwardly be converted into a kind of consolidated limit order book, right? And it's just based on time priority and the idea that if a trade can occur, it'll be matched. So my question is, does your paper have anything to say about how the consolidated tape should be used? Maybe it could be used just to report trades, just report quotes, but it could also be used as an auction mechanism itself, as a limit order book.
Right, and it's a very good good question. So I think, okay, actually first on your point that may pre-trade, the SIP can't help much, but if you actually use that sort of records of what happened already, I think maybe one useful use case is actually for the post-trade transaction cost analysis. It also actually relates to Beyond's point that maybe as institutional traders, or for buy-side traders, that if you actually kind of delegate your trading to some execution algorithm companies, afterwards, if you have actually a track record of your trades, you can always actually compute the post-trade transaction cost to see if the guy actually does the job. I think that's actually one maybe use case. And
okay, but let me just add a point about that. Historically, the consolidated tape has not had a unique identifier on it that allows a trader to match their trade to a quantity and price that shows up as a trade on the consolidated tape. And similarly, you can't really match your bids and offers to the bids and offers that show up on the consolidated tape. So do you think that the consolidated tape should have that capability? And then there's the question of if it's a unique identifier, who gets to see the unique identifier? Do the regulators see it? Does the person who places the order see it? Do the exchanges, of course, have to see it, or the tape operator has to see it? But what about the rest of the market?
Can I maybe chip in here? So, Shihao, if you unshare your screen, we can see everybody that's still left.
Oh yeah, sure, of course.
So Pete, one important issue to keep in mind is that the consolidated tape currently, as Shihao mentioned, shows only very limited information on quotes. It only shows the best bid and NS quotes. If you want to ramp that up to the entire message flow, we're looking at a completely different technological challenge. So even though I like where you're going and I like to think in ways that you're doing as well, there is actually it's an art to run a market and all these messages appropriately.
Yeah, I agree that it becomes more complicated if you allow a hugely deep limit order book. You could also run it by saying the only bids and offers we're going to allow. Actually, the Cantor Fitzgerald bond screen used to work this way when I was working in the markets in the late 70s, early 80s. But they only allow as valid bids and offers, the best bid and the best offer. So if you place a bid that's better than everybody else in the market, everybody else gets canceled. So that makes it actually the same as the consolidated tape, which is sort of the way that market worked.
Yeah, I mean, if there is, Shihao just overrule me, right? But since we have this beautiful audience here, as Björn said, we have we're currently designing a solution that's like SIP here. And Carlos, you might have ideas too. And I'm actually part of a panel early December that discusses in what solid state the first version should be set. Any ideas on the ideal design of this, please let me know how you think about this.
I think you mentioned a word that we should hear more of in market microstructure, and that's design. It's like when economists think about market microstructure, they really are thinking about market design. And when business school finance professors think about market microstructure, they often thinking about how the markets actually work today, and what the data from today's markets tell us about how today's markets work. I think it's better to have more of an emphasis on design.
Albert, I'm not sure if you've got a chance to talk to the colleagues at the BIS, the Bank International Settlement. They are working on, I would say, worse geographies, let's just say, like that's on their multi-central bank digital currency issues, and they're doing permissioned ledgers. And that's generally a bigger nightmare, maybe, because the flow of information is it's actual money moving around. But the recent report, there's one coming out in March 22, I think, and then there's one that came out September. I want to say that September was China, Thailand, and something else. And the March 22 will be, I want to say Australia, South Africa, and then the other one is with Singapore. And Singapore is generally the colleagues who have, Singapore and Canada are generally the main central banks who have been dealing with kind of permissioned blockchains for the longest, and multi-currency central bank digital currencies. I don't know, the innovation hubs have come out, and I think that they would be very interested to hear also what you have to share to them, because I'm not sure where you are based off of, in Sweden or not. I think there is an innovation hub there, no? I might be wrong.
In Stockholm, yes.
Yeah.
But Shihao is in Amsterdam.
Yeah. I'll leave it at that, because it's above my pay grade. That one is very much above my pay grade.
Thanks.
But humbly, if I can be of use, right? Happy to follow up, of course, and maybe talking off. But publicly, of course, I would. The BIS is a good colleagues. Have been dealing with this, with some of these issues.
Thank you.
And just make sure I also understand the thinking here is that the decentralization versus the centralization piece is always a challenge, or is it an asset for you? When you think
for me or for Shihao?
I don't know. I'm just trying to think this through. You know,
for me, it's a liability. That the purpose of decentralization is to prevent a customer here from trading with a customer there, but force those customers to go through intermediaries. And then the substantive question is, do the intermediaries reduce the cost of matching those customers to each other, or do they increase the cost of matching the customers to each other? And my answer is, they increase the cost of matching the customers to each other. That's how they stay in business. And therefore, a market should be structured so that customers can match with other customers as directly as possible, with as little unnecessary intermediation as possible. You know, sometimes intermediation is necessary because people want to buy I want to buy A, you want to buy B, B, A, and B are closed substitutes. Or I want to buy A now, you want to buy A 5 minutes from now. Okay, somebody has to hold the asset for 5 minutes. So, you know, that intermediation is fine. But if I want to buy now A and you want to buy now the same asset A, we ought to be able to match to each other without an intermediary taking making a profit off of it that increases our costs.
This was extremely helpful. I cannot thank the colleagues enough. Sorry that we went 20 minutes over. It's my humble apologies. Yeah, thank you.
Not at all. Are there any more questions before we close for today? No? Then thank you very much, everyone, for contributing, and above all to Shihao for sharing your work with us today. And I look forward to see you all next week.
Yep, thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.